brunch plates are still on the table, but I am on the phone with the county recorder's fraud alert line, my voice as steady as a concrete foundation. Smears of hollandaise sauce and a lone discarded strawberry mock my stomach. Eric is in the living room, laughing with his wife's parents, oblivious. He thinks the game is over. He has miscalculated the load-bearing capacity of my silence. The agent on the line asks me to confirm my identity. Yes, Thomas. Yes, that is the address. An hour ago, the sun was pouring into my tile-floored sunroom, warming the potted rosemary and making the chrome on the espresso machine gleam. Eric had insisted on brunch. Just a little family get-together, Dad. His wife, Cynthia, and her parents, the Harwells, sat around my small glass table. Mr. Harwell was complimenting my garden, his eyes scanning everything with an unnerving sense of appraisal. I just nodded, sipping my coffee from a chipped espresso cup, a tiny imperfection I had always found comforting. Eric cleared his throat, a theatrical sound he used before making pronouncements. So we have some exciting news. For my anniversary with Cynthia, and as a thank you to her amazing parents, I've done something special. He beamed, looking at the Harwells, not at me. I've gifted them the coastal villa. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating like humidity before a storm. The scent of lemon oil from the furniture polish suddenly seemed cloying. My hand, holding the cup, did not tremble. Mrs. Harwell gasped, a perfectly rehearsed performance of surprise. Oh, Eric, you shouldn't have. But her eyes were alight with triumph. She was already mentally placing new furniture, tearing down walls. That little place, it's far too generous. The way she said little place felt like a deliberate pinprick, a test of my reaction. The villa was not little. It was where I had proposed to Margaret. It was a repository of 4 decades of memories, each one more valuable than the structure itself. It was my life's work made manifest. It's nothing, Eric said, waving a dismissive hand. Dad doesn't use it much anymore. It's better that it stays in the family. Get some life put back into it. He finally looked at me, his expression a careful mixture of magnanimity and pity. You're 75, Dad. It's time you simplified. This just takes one more thing off your plate. He spoke about my life as if it were a project to be decommissioned, a site to be cleared for new development. The entitlement was breathtaking. I placed the chipped espresso cup back on its saucer. The sound was a definitive click against the porcelain. I said nothing. My silence seemed to make them uneasy for a moment. Cynthia jumped in, her voice bright and brittle. We already have a designer looking at some swatches. Mom thinks a lovely coastal grandmother aesthetic would be perfect. All whites and light blues. It'll need a complete overhaul, of course. The whole place is so dated. She said it without a hint of malice, which was somehow worse. Mr. Harwell leaned forward, placing his fleshy hands on the table. We appreciate this, more than you know, Thomas. We'll be good stewards of the property. Already checked the property tax assessment online. That $1.12 million valuation is quite something. He named the figure, $1,120,000, as if it were a trophy he had just been awarded. It was a confirmation of the prize, a verbal signature on a deal I had never been asked to approve. They were not asking. They were telling. I simply nodded. A single, slow inclination of my head. I let them fill the void with more plans, more empty platitudes about family and looking after me. They spoke of my future in the third person, as if I were a piece of antique furniture they had graciously decided to keep. Their voices became a low hum, the words losing their meaning. I was focused on the stress lines in the glass of the tabletop, tracing the invisible fractures with my eyes. Everything has a breaking point. Eric stood up, clapping his hands together. Well, that's settled then. We'll get the last of your things moved out by the end of the month, Dad. No need for you to lift a finger. The sheer audacity of it was almost elegant in its completeness. They had planned it all, right down to the logistics of my dispossession. They saw a quiet cul-de-sac and a quiet old man and assumed both were easily managed. They saw my gray hair and my quiet routine as signs of surrender. After they left, a convoy of smug satisfaction driving away, I sat in the sunroom for a long time. The afternoon sun slanted across the tile floor. I picked up the chipped espresso cup, feeling the familiar rough edge under my thumb. It was a small flaw, but it gave the object character. It was a reminder that things are not always as smooth and perfect as they appear on the surface. Eric had always hated that cup. He tried to throw it away more than once. I always retrieved it. He never understood that the most important structures are the ones you cannot see. In my study, the air is cool and smells of old paper and leather. I do not turn on the main light, preferring the focused beam of my desk lamp. My filing cabinets are not organized by year or topic, but by project. The villa is Project 7B. I pulled the heavy drawer open, the metal rollers moving with a well-oiled whisper. Inside, the files were immaculate. I am, before all else, a civil engineer. Precision is not a habit. It is a state of being, and I have every receipt. I bypassed the household expense ledgers and insurance policies, going straight to the core file. It was a thick manila folder, heavy with legal documents. The original deed, surveys I had commissioned myself, blueprints from the initial construction, and tucked at the very back, a document bound in a dark blue cover. I slid it out, its weight familiar in my hands. The title was embossed in gold leaf, the Margaret and Thomas Coastal Trust. The paper felt cool and solid beneath my fingertips, a shield against the heat of my rising anger. My son's signature was on a quitclaim deed he must have filed himself. I found a copy he'd carelessly left tucked in my tax prep folder last month. He had signed as grantor, a role he had no right to assume. The document number was clearly printed, Doc 2025-33107. He must have used an online notary service, counting on the anonymity of digital transactions and the assumption that no one would look too closely at a simple intrafamily transfer. A fatal error in his calculations. The parcel number was listed correctly, parcel 04219B, a sequence of numbers and letters that represented a cliffside view of the ocean, a small garden where Margaret grew sea lavender, and a stone fireplace we built together over one long summer. To Eric, it was just an asset, a commodity to be bartered for favor with his in-laws. He had turned our sanctuary into a bargaining chip, and he had done it with the casual arrogance of a man who believes he has already won. I sat back in my leather chair, the springs groaning softly. The plan began to form in my mind, not as a storm of emotion, but as a schematic, a series of logical steps, each dependent on the one before it. A title search to confirm the fraudulent filing, a fraud alert placed with the county, an affidavit to be drafted and notarized, and a single, decisive phone call. There would be no yelling, no dramatic confrontation. This would be a demolition, executed with the quiet precision of a controlled implosion. My son believed that because he managed some of my online bill payments, he understood the totality of my financial life. He had access to my primary checking account, Act 4482, which I kept funded for household expenses. He saw the mundane outflows for utilities and groceries and assumed that was the entire picture. He never once asked about the source of the funds that refilled it, nor did he ever question why I still insisted on receiving paper statements from my brokerage accounts. His curiosity was remarkably shallow. He saw what I allowed him to see. As an engineer, I believe in redundancies, in fail-safes. My financial structures were no different. Eric was operating on a surface-level understanding, like a contractor who looks at a finished building and has no concept of the deep foundations and steel framework hidden within the walls. He was about to try and knock down a skyscraper with a hammer, confident in his own strength, unaware of the reinforced concrete core he was about to strike. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and a fountain pen. My handwriting, once a draftsman's precise script, was now a bit shaky, but the intent was as firm as ever. I wrote down the key terms: irrevocable trust, spendthrift clause, successor trustee, grantor, beneficiary. Words that Eric had likely seen, but never bothered to truly understand. Words that were about to become the fulcrum upon which his entire world would pivot. He had built his house on sand, and the tide was about to come in. I remembered a conversation with Margaret years ago when we were setting up the trust with our lawyer. "It's for Eric," she had said, her voice soft but firm. to protect him from himself. At the time, I thought she was being overly cautious. Eric was just a boy, full of ambition and a charming carelessness. Now, I understood the depth of her foresight. She had seen the potential for this kind of recklessness long before I had. Her love had always been intertwined with a fierce, clear-eyed pragmatism. Just then, I heard his car pull back into the driveway. He must have forgotten something. I remained in my study, the door slightly ajar. I heard him come inside, calling my name. When I did not answer, he must have assumed I was napping. Then I heard the sliding glass door to the patio open and his voice, artificially loud and boastful. He was on his phone, using the speaker function. No, it was easy, he said. He barely blinked. Honestly, I think he was relieved. My breath caught in my chest. I stayed perfectly still, a predator sensing its prey. The patio slider was just across the hall from my study, and his words carried clearly in the quiet house. The paperwork was a breeze. I just listed myself as the grantor and pushed it through. The man at the recorder's office didn't even look up. They just stamped them. He'll never even know how to check. A cold, clean rage washed over me, sharpening my focus to a razor's edge. He was not just arrogant. He was proud of his deceit. Yeah, the Harwells are ecstatic, he continued, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction. This really solidifies my position with them. Cynthia is thrilled. It's a win-win. There was a pause. What about Dad? Oh, he's fine. I'll keep managing his little checking account and make sure he's comfortable. He has this place. It's more than enough for him now. He spoke of my life and my assets as if he were a corporate raider discussing the carve-up of a newly acquired, struggling company. He was confirming every detail of my assumptions. He had committed fraud, openly, and without a shred of remorse. He believed my age was a synonym for incompetence. He believed my quiet nature was a sign of weakness. The conversation was a gift, a recorded confession delivered directly to my ears. I heard him laugh again, a sound that now seemed utterly alien to me. Then the slider closed, his footsteps faded, and the front door shut. The house fell silent once more. But now the silence was different. It was charged. I did not move from my chair. The overheard proof of his betrayal settled not as a wound, but as a final piece of structural reinforcement. My plan was no longer just a reaction. It was a moral and logical necessity. He had declared war, assuming I was in undefended territory. He had forgotten that I was the one who drew the maps, the one who built the fortifications. I picked up my pen again, the slight tremor in my hand now completely gone. My first call was not to a lawyer. Lawyers are for battles. I was an engineer. I preferred to win by making the battle unwinnable for the other side from the start. My first call was to a title search company, a small, independent firm I had used for decades. I spoke with a woman named Maria, whose voice was calm and professional. I explained that I needed an expedited search and a certified copy of the most recent deed filed against parcel 4219B. I did not mention fraud. Certainly, Thomas, she said. We had worked together before. Is this for a refinance? Her question was standard procedure, but I answered with precise ambiguity. No, this is for an estate clarification. I need the chain of title to be airtight. The word airtight resonated. It was my word. She understood. I can have a preliminary report for you by morning, and the certified documents by messenger in 48 hours. I authorized the fee without a second thought. The first ear was now engaged. My second action was online. I navigated to the Kelly Recorder's official website, a clunky and outdated portal that I knew well. I found the property fraud alert section. It was a simple system. You enter your name and the parcel number, and the system automatically notifies you via email and text message of any documents recorded against your property. It was a free service. Eric, in his hubris, had likely never even known it existed. I entered my details. A small green checkmark appeared. The tripwire was set. Next, I began drafting the affidavit of fraudulent conveyance. I used the trust document as my guide, quoting the relevant sections verbatim. I stated the facts plainly and without emotion, that the property was held in an irrevocable trust, that I, Thomas, was the sole current trustee, that my son, Eric, was a beneficiary but held no trustee powers and was never the legal grantor, that the deed, Doc 2025-33107, was therefore void on its face. Each sentence was a steel rivet hammered into place. As I wrote, I thought of Margaret, of her quiet strength. This villa was her legacy as much as mine. She had chosen the spot, supervised the builders, and planted the first rosemary bush by the front door. Its scent, a constant welcome. To let it be stolen through such a cheap, tawdry deception would be an insult to her memory. This was not just about property. It was about stewardship. It was about honoring the careful, loving work that had gone into building a life together. I was defending our shared history. I would need the affidavit notarized. I looked at the clock. It was almost 5. I called a mobile notary service, a young man who advertised 24/7 availability. He said he could be at my home in an hour. Just need a valid ID, he said cheerfully. I told him that would not be a problem. I laid my driver's license and passport on the desk next to the unsigned affidavit. The pieces were moving into position with a satisfying click. Eric's brunch announcement felt like a lifetime ago. While I waited, I made myself a simple dinner, toast and a soft-boiled egg. I ate at the kitchen counter, not in the sunroom. I did not want to look at the empty chairs and the ghost of that conversation. I was methodical even in this. Nourishment was a necessary part of the process. I could not allow emotion to cloud my judgment or deplete my energy. This was a long game, but the most critical moves were to be made in the next few days. The foundation was being poured. The doorbell rang precisely on time. The notary was a young man with a polite smile and a heavy briefcase. I led him to my study. He checked my identification carefully, comparing the photos to my face. He watched as I signed the affidavit, my signature firm and clear. He then applied his own signature and his official seal, the embossing press making a satisfying crunch on the paper. I paid him in cash, and he was gone in less than 15 minutes. The document was now a weapon. With the notarized affidavit in hand, I felt a calm settle over me. I had the facts. I had the proof. I had the legal instrument to correct the wrong. Eric had used the cheap, flimsy document to try and steal $1 million asset. I was about to counter it with a document built on the bedrock of established trust law. He had played checkers, moving his pieces brazenly across the board. He did not realize he was playing against a grandmaster in a game of chess. A final step for the night was a phone call. The call that started this whole story. It was after hours, but the county recorder had a voicemail system for their fraud department. I left a message, my voice even. I identified myself, the parcel, and the document number in question. I stated that I was the legal owner and trustee, and that I had not authorized any transfer. I said I had a notarized affidavit and would be in touch during business hours. A simple message. A declaration. The first shot was fired. Sleep was a functional requirement, not a comfort. I woke before the dawn, as is my habit, and watched the sky lighten from gray to a pale washed-out blue. The world felt clean, new. At 7:15 a.m., an email chimed. It was from Maria. The subject line was simple. Preliminary report for parcel 4219B. I opened the attached file. There it was, in black and white, a recorded quitclaim deed, grantor Eric, grantee Harwell, filed on May 11th. The digital ink on his betrayal was barely dry. The confirmation felt cold and necessary. But that won't be necessary, Eric, I said. There was a slight pause on his end. Oh, changed your mind about needing help? He asked, a hint of patronizing amusement in his tone. I looked at the notarized affidavit sitting on my desk. A folded and powerful thing. No, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly even. I just mean you should not worry about the villa's arrangements. Everything is being put back in its proper place. I ended the call before he could ask what I meant. Let him wonder. Let him misinterpret. Just before noon, a motorcycle messenger arrived, a young man in a leather jacket, who handed me a large cardboard envelope. Inside were the certified copies from the title company. The documents were crisp, the county's raised seal a rough circle under my thumb. This was tangible proof, legally recognized and admissible. I placed the envelope in my briefcase next to my own affidavit. The case was built. The evidence was compiled. Now, It was time to present it to the court of record. The county government center was a monument to 1970s civic architecture, a block of beige concrete with tinted windows that reflected a distorted, brownish sky. Inside, the air was still and cool, smelling faintly of toner and disinfectant. I followed the signs for the recorder of deeds. The linoleum floors squeaked under my sensible shoes. It was the kind of place where lives were changed, not with shouts, but with the quiet, inexorable thud of a rubber stamp. I felt perfectly at home in the orderly quiet. I took a number and waited. People drifted in and out, clutching folders, looking anxious or bored. They were here for marriage licenses, for business filings, for the mundane paperwork that stitches society together. I was here to unstitch a crime. When my number was called, I walked to the counter, a long expanse of worn formica under harsh fluorescent lights. A woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Brenda looked up at me from behind a plexiglass shield, her expression neutral. "I need to file this," I said, sliding the notarized affidavit of fraudulent conveyance through the small opening at the bottom of the shield. I also provided the core pages of the trust document and a certified copy of the fraudulent deed. I did not offer a long explanation. The documents were designed to speak for themselves. An engineer's report is not a plea. It is a statement of fact. Brenda picked up the affidavit and began to read, her expression of bored indifference slowly changing. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. She paused at the section detailing the irrevocable nature of the trust and the specific language of the spendthrift clause. She looked from the paper to me, then back again. For the first time, she seemed to see me not as another old man, but as the subject of the powerful legal instrument in her hands. She read my signature, then looked at the notary's seal. She tapped a finger on the document number of the fraudulent deed I had referenced. Without a word, she picked up her phone and dialed a 3-digit extension. "Yeah, it's Brenda at counter 4. Can you come take a look at something? I've got an irrevocable trust issue on a fraudulent conveyance claim." She listened for a moment. "Yeah, I think you'll want to see it." She hung up and looked at me. "My supervisor will be right out." Her tone had shifted from bureaucratic apathy to something approaching professional interest. The system was now taking notice. The supervisor was a man with a sharp suit and a sharper gaze. He read the documents in half the time Brenda had, his focus absolute. He nodded slowly. "The trust is ironclad," he said, his voice quiet but carrying authority. "The spendthrift provision is unambiguous. The grantor on this quitclaim deed, your son, had no legal standing to make a conveyance. He can't give away what he never legally controlled." He looked at me with a measure of respect. "This filing will effectively void the transfer. It renders the deed a nullity," the supervisor continued, speaking to Brenda but making sure I could hear. "When you record this affidavit, it places a cloud on the title so significant that no title insurer will ever touch it. The transfer is dead on arrival. Legally, it never happened." He handed the papers back to Brenda. "File it. Make a note in the parcel record to cross-reference this affidavit with Doc 2025-333-107. The chain of title needs to be crystal clear about this." He gave me another nod and walked away. Brenda took the documents and began her work. She typed furiously into her computer terminal. The quiet clicks of the keyboard were the sounds of my victory. She then rolled the affidavit into a scanner, which whirred and beeped. Finally, she took out a heavy rubber stamp, the kind with a rotating date wheel, and pressed it onto a fresh page in a massive, leather-bound ledger book. She turned it around and stamped my copy of the affidavit with a loud, satisfying thud. The ink was a deep, official purple. "That will be a $20 filing fee," she said, her voice back to its normal monotone. The brief moment of drama over, I paid with a crisp bill from my wallet. $20. The price to reclaim a $1 million property and a lifetime of memories. The absurdity of it was not lost on me. She handed me my receipt and my stamped copy. "It's officially on record as of now," she said. Anyone running a search will see it immediately. I thanked her and walked away. Walking out of the government center and into the bright afternoon sun felt like surfacing from a deep dive. The air was warm, and I could smell the distant scent of the ocean on the breeze, that familiar mix of salt and life. I had not felt angry or vengeful. I had felt like an engineer reinforcing a compromised structure. I had identified the point of failure, calculated the stresses, and applied a precisely engineered solution. The job was done. The structure was secure once more. On the drive home, I took the coastal route. The Pacific was a brilliant blue, capped with white foam. I pulled over at a scenic viewpoint, the same one where Margaret and I used to stop after visiting the villa. She had loved this view. She had a way of seeing things, of understanding their true foundations. This whole trust, this fortress she had insisted we build around our family, was her final act of stewardship. Her foresight had just saved our shared legacy. I felt a profound sense of peace. When I arrived home, I went into the sunroom. The light was soft now, the heat of the day beginning to fade. Everything was just as the brunch party had left it. I picked up the discarded strawberry from the saucer and threw it away. I rinsed the plates and placed them in the dishwasher. I wiped the table clean, erasing the last physical traces of their presence. Restoring order. It is what I have always done. My house was quiet again. It was mine. An hour later, as expected, my phone buzzed with an email alert. The subject line read, County Recorder Alert, document filed on parcel 04219B. I opened it. It showed my own affidavit, now officially part of the public record. The system I had activated was working perfectly. The tripwire had been crossed by my own deliberate action. Now, the alert would also be going out to anyone else who had recently run a title search. The Harwells, their lawyers, their title insurers. The first tremor was sent. It took less than 30 minutes for the first aftershock to arrive. The phone rang and the caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. I answered. Is this Thomas? A man's voice demanded, tight with panic and fury. This is Arthur Harwell. My lawyer just called me. He said you filed some sort of nonsense against the villa title. What in God's name do you think you're doing? His voice was accustomed to bullying, to getting its way. It was a voice that had never been told no. Hello, Arthur, I said, my voice calm. I am not doing anything. I am undoing something. The property was transferred fraudulently. I have simply filed a legal notice to that effect with the county recorder. The deed your son-in-law gave you is worthless. I stated it as a fact, not an accusation, like explaining a failed stress test result. Worthless? Our lawyers approved it. Eric signed it, he sputtered, his rage turning to indignant disbelief. He was a man watching a prize vanish from his grasp. Eric does not have the authority to sign such a document. The property is held in an irrevocable trust, I explained patiently. I suggest you speak with your lawyers again and have them examine the trust documents that are referenced in my affidavit. It is all a matter of public record now. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end, the sound of a man whose world was rapidly tilting off its axis. You'll be hearing from my attorney, he snarled, and hung up. 10 minutes later, a car screeched to a halt in my driveway. I knew it was Eric. No one else drove into my quiet cul-de-sac. With such frantic aggression, the front door burst open. He stood in the entryway, his face pale, his suit jacket rumpled. He was holding his phone in his hand like a weapon. What did you do? He gasped, his voice a raw mix of fear and fury. Art Harwell just called me screaming. He said the whole deal is off. Then I committed fraud. I did not get up from my chair in the sunroom. I simply turned to look at him. He is correct, I said. You did. My calmness seemed to infuriate him even more. What are you talking about? It was a gift, a transfer. I signed the paperwork, he insisted, taking a step towards me, his composure shredding with every word. It was just a form I downloaded online. It's what families do. He was trying to normalize his crime, to shrink it down to a simple, familial misunderstanding. You signed a legal document falsely claiming to be the grantor of a property you do not own and have never owned, I stated, my voice level. The villa has been held by the Margaret and Thomas Coastal Trust for 20 years. You are a beneficiary of that trust, Eric. You are not its trustee. You have no more power to give away that villa than the mailman does. I let the words sink in. Each one a precise, targeted strike. His face went from white to a deep, mottled red. The trust? That's just some old estate planning paperwork. It doesn't mean anything. I help you with your finances. I have the login for your checking account, he yelled, as if listing these minor duties somehow granted him ownership of my entire life. He was grasping for any piece of authority, any justification for what he had done. He was a child, caught with his hand in a cookie jar he believed was rightfully his. I gave you an allowance, I said, my voice cutting through his tirade. The word hung in the air, diminishing him. I allow you to monitor a single account for household expenses, an account I fund. I did not give you my life's work. I paused, then delivered the final, load-bearing truth. The trust contains a spendthrift clause, Eric. Your mother insisted upon it. It means the trust assets are protected from your creditors, and more importantly, from your own poor judgment. You can never control them. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. It was not just that his scheme had failed. It was that it had been impossible from the very beginning. He had been checkmated by a move made 2 decades earlier. The humiliation he must be feeling, especially in front of the in-laws he was so desperate to impress, was a far greater punishment than any I could have devised. He had demolished his own standing, all by himself. But why? He finally whispered, the question not accusatory, but genuinely lost. Why would you set it up that way? He looked around the room at the familiar potted rosemary in the tile floors, as if seeing for the first time that they were part of a structure he did not comprehend. He saw a quiet old man in a quiet house, and he had assumed the foundations were shallow. Now he was seeing the bedrock, and he was finding it impenetrable. I did not answer his question directly. Instead, I gave him the only answer that mattered. Your mother was a brilliant woman. She loved you very much, but she was not blind. She saw your ambition, but she also saw the carelessness that went with it. The mention of his mother silenced any possible retort. It was a name and a memory he could not argue against. He had betrayed us both, and he now had to stand in the wreckage he had created. He sank into one of the chairs at the table, the same chair Mr. Harwell had occupied, and put his head in his hands. The confident son who had announced my dispossession over brunch was gone, replaced by this broken, defeated man. He had leveraged his future on a stolen past and had lost everything. He had miscalculated not just the law, but the fundamental character of his own father. He had seen age as decay, not as the slow accretion of strength and wisdom. The Harwells, he mumbled into his hands. They think I'm a liar and a fraud. I offered no words of comfort. His relationship with his in-laws was a structure of his own design. If its foundations were faulty, it was his responsibility. I had merely pointed out the structural code violations. The inevitable collapse was his to witness alone. My duty was to the legacy Margaret and I had built, a structure designed to withstand storms, even those that came from within. I stood up and walked to the kitchen counter that separated the sunroom from the main house. I took down the old grinder and a bag of coffee beans. The familiar, earthy scent filled the air. My afternoon routine was a comfort, a series of small, predictable actions in a world that had briefly tilted. Eric remained at the table, a silent statue of his own failure. He had nothing left to say. There was nothing for me to say either. The plans had been executed. The result was clear. He eventually looked up, his eyes pleading. Dad? His voice was small, the voice of a boy again. He was looking for a solution, a fix, a way to undo the damage to his pride. He was looking for me to be the engineer and repair what he had broken. But some things once demolished cannot be rebuilt. Trust is one of them. I did not turn around. I continued to measure the beans into the grinder, my movements precise and unhurried. The moment for discussion was long past. The quiet of the house was profound. The only sound was the scrape of the coffee scoop against the beans. Eric finally pushed his chair back, the legs making a harsh sound on the tile. He stood there for a long moment, waiting for a reaction from me that would never come. When he realized none was forthcoming, he turned and walked out of the sunroom, his footsteps slow and heavy. He did not slam the door this time. He closed it softly behind him. A sound of utter and final defeat. Alone in the quiet, I looked at the checked espresso cup sitting on the counter. Eric had always seen it as a flawed object that needed replacing. He never understood that the chip was part of its history, a mark of its endurance. It had been dropped, washed, used thousands of times, and it was still here, still useful, still whole, despite its imperfection. A quiet testament to the fact that the things that last are not always the ones that look perfect on the surface. I pick up the chipped cup, its familiar weight a small, solid comfort in my hand. I turn my back to the empty chair where my son had sat, and I begin to prepare my afternoon coffee. The sharp, rhythmic whir of the grinder is the only sound that fills the silence. A grinding away of the past, a preparation for the quiet that lies ahead.